The cold air bit at Jon Snow's face, but it was the silence that made him shiver. The kind of silence that followed after something sacred had been broken. Daenerys' blood still stained his hands warm when it flowed, now crusted dark, dry. Her body lay where he had held her last, beneath the shadow of the Iron Throne. He hadn't cried, not when she fell limp, not when Drogon screamed, not even when the dragon vanished into the eastern sky, carrying her corpse beyond the edge of the known world. He stood alone in that throne room of ash and melted steel, where every step echoed like judgment. The ashes still fell like snow, and for a moment Jon thought maybe the gods had turned their backs on him, that the fire had erased them too. Then the doors opened. Grey Worm marched in, flanked by Unsullied. His eyes met Jon's bloodied tunic, then dropped to the blackened patch where Daenerys had died. There were no words, only understanding, bitter and sharp. "You killed your queen," Grey Worm hissed, his voice tight and low. "You killed the world's only hope." "I killed a tyrant," Jon replied, though even he didn't believe it as much as he once had. They didn't kill him. Not then. Not even when the Unsullied demanded it. But neither did they let him leave. He was confined, watched, judged. Tyrion, still imprisoned, was brought before a broken council to determine the fate of the realm. No one trusted anyone. Sansa was silent. Arya wouldn't look at him. Bran, ever still, stared at him with eyes too calm for all the madness. But, in the end, it was a realm desperate for stability that gave in. The people in the streets wanted peace. The lords and ladies wanted quiet. And so they made him king, not out of love, not even out of loyalty. They gave him the crown because he was the least dangerous option. It was Davos who placed the sword. Across Jon's lap when the coronation was done in the Great Hall, still half burned and rebuilt from dragonfire. "You didn't ask for it," Davos said, almost as if apologizing. "But none of us asked for this life." Jon gripped the hilt. "Of Loneclaw. She wanted to break the wheel. I broke her." He ruled from the same seat she never got to sit on. The Iron Throne was half-melted still, and no blacksmith dared to remake it. He refused to have it rebuilt. He sat beside it, never on it. When courtiers came to whisper and plea, they did so in a hall that smelled of soot and death. The North did not bend the knee. Sansa remained queen in the North. Arya disappeared westward, chasing a world without thrones. Bran ruled knowledge, from his tree of whispers. And Jon? Jon ruled alone. He walked the halls like a shadow of himself. The small council feared him. The people adored him in silence, but they never cheered. No songs were written. No ballads sung. His victories were marked by silence and fear, not celebration. At night, he sat alone in Daenerys' old chambers. He hadn't moved her things. Her carved wooden comb still lay on the dresser. Her gown still hung untouched. And sometimes, just before sleep took him, he thought he heard her voice behind him, soft, accusing, loving. He dreamed of the dagger, not of the moment he used it, but of holding it in his hands long before, when he still had a choice. He wondered what might have happened if he had walked away, if he had let her rule, if he had turned northward and never looked back. But the past was a story he couldn't rewrite. And the future? The future was a cold iron weight pressing against his soul. Every raven that arrived brought news of unrest. Fleeting peace in Dorne, rebellion in the Reach, whispers of red priests. Preaching her name in Essos, she had become a martyr, not a monster. And he, the kinslayer who sat on her ashes. He sometimes sat outside in the garden where she had once walked. He had planted no new flowers. The burned ones remained, shriveled and black. He didn't speak much. He didn't smile. And when snow began to fall again the next winter, he wondered if the world would ever forgive what he had done. Or worse, if he ever would. The first snowfall of winter arrived quietly, like a ghost slipping through the walls of the Red Keep. Jon stood on the highest balcony, wrapped in a thick black cloak, staring at the city below. King's Landing looked peaceful from a distance, but he knew better. The silence wasn't calm. It was dread. No one celebrated the new king. The bells hadn't rung. The people remembered what happened the last time they rang. He kept watching the city like he was waiting for someone to call out. To scream, what? They were all thinking, murderer, traitor, kingslayer. But no one did. No one dared. Fear, it seemed, was stronger than rage. That morning, Lord Gendry arrived from Storm's End. He bowed, respectfully, but without warmth. The bastard-turned lord now stood before a bastard-turned king. They shared a strange, silent understanding. Neither belonged where they stood. "You've ignored my ravens," Gendry said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I read them all," and answered none. Jon turned his eyes back to the city. "What is it you want to say?" Gendry stepped forward. "Dorne is testing your reach. They hold back taxes. The Iron Islands speak of independence again. And the faith. Well, they say Daenerys was chosen by the gods. And you. You stole their flame." Jon didn't respond right away. His hands tightened into fists beneath the cloak. "They're building her into a legend," Gendry continued. "And legends make dangerous ghosts. I didn't kill her to become king," Jon said quietly. "But you are king," Gendry said, voice harder now. "And your enemies don't care why you did it. They only care that you did. They're waiting, watching. Every day you hesitate, you lose ground." Jon turned sharply. "Do you want war, Gendry? Do you think they'll fear another dragonless king?" "I think they already smell blood," Gendry said. "And you sit here, mourning her, while the kingdom crumbles." Jon wanted to scream. He wanted to strike something, to shatter the throne he never wanted. But he didn't move. He didn't even blink. "You may leave," Jon said coldly. Gendry didn't bow this time. He walked away without another word, leaving behind the truth. No one else dared say aloud. Later that night, Jon walked the ruined halls alone. His footsteps echoed against scorched stone, and each corridor seemed darker than the last. He ended up in the throne room, half rebuilt, half dead. He sat in silence beside the throne, staring at the melted swords that once terrified men for centuries. He spoke aloud, though no one was there. "Was I right, Daenerys? Did I save them? Or damn them all?" Only the wind answered, whistling, through shattered windows. The next morning, ravens brought fresh trouble, riots in Flea Bottom. A sept burned in Old Town. A Targaryen loyalist had been caught poisoning the well at River Run. Jon read each scroll with increasing silence. The council gathered at midday, nervous and whispering. Sir Davos, now his hand, laid the scrolls across the table. "It's spreading. Jon, they blame you for her death, and they're not wrong. But what comes next is more than guilt. It's survival." Jon looked around at the faces at the table. Lords and ladies who once stood beneath Daenerys, now serving her killer. "Then we give them what they fear," Jon said at last. Davos blinked. "What does that mean? We prepare the armies. Fortify the borders. Let the realm know I will not be broken. If they want a king, I'll be their king. But I'll do it my way. No more silence. No more waiting." He stood up slowly, his voice calm but final. "And the first thing I want is to speak to the people. No more hiding. No more ruling from shadows." There was silence, then cautious nods. Later that week, Jon stood on the steps of the great sept, what was left of it, and addressed the people of King's Landing. His voice was steady, but his eyes gave him away. They weren't the eyes of a ruler. They were the eyes of a man still bleeding inside. "I did what I had to," he told them. not for power, not for glory, but because no one else would stop. Her, some cheered, some spat, some stood silent, waiting for the next body to fall. That night, someone tried to kill him. A blade in the dark, a shadow in the corridor. It missed, but it was only the beginning. The blade had come too close. Jon's shirt was torn just beneath the ribs, a shallow red line marking where the assassin's knife had grazed him. If the attacker hadn't slipped on the cold stone floor, the story would have ended there, in silence and shadow, but luck or fate had interfered. A man was dead now, killed by a single stroke from Sir Davos, who had followed Jon out of instinct. Jon didn't speak about it afterward. Not to Davos, not to the council, not even to Ghost, who now lingered outside his chambers like a quiet warden. But the scar reminded him every morning that his rule was bought not only with blood but also with a target on his back. In the following days, the castle grew tense. The Unsullied had left King's Landing, sailing for Noth as promised. But their absence was more like a hole in the wall than a closed chapter. The gold cloaks were disorganized. The new Lord Commanders were untested. And among the people, rumors spread like fire through dry grass. They said a red priest had begun preaching in the alleys, calling Daenerys the Mother Reborn, the fire that will return. They said her death was not the end, that dragons don't die, they sleep. And that the man who killed her, the man who wore the crown of ash, would choke on it before long. Jon had those priests arrested at first, quietly, no spectacle. But for everyone captured, 2 more would rise. They didn't fear him. They pitied him. That was worse. Tyrion came to visit him that week, his chains finally removed, but his exile from council affairs still firm. He wore no fine robes now, only a threadbare cloak and weary eyes. "You've built yourself a kingdom of ghosts," Tyrion said, sitting across from him in the candlelit war room. "And you wonder why they whisper at your door." Jon sipped his wine, not looking up. "What would you have me do? Burn them? Hang them?" Tyrion smiled bitterly. "You wouldn't dare. That's why they hate you. Not because you're cruel, but because you remind them of what they lost. Daenerys gave them something to worship. You offer them hard truth. No one sings songs about hard truth." Jon set the goblet down and leaned back in his chair. "She would have killed thousands more, probably," Tyrion agreed. "And still they would have followed her." There was a pause, heavy with unsaid things. Then Jon asked, "Did I make a mistake?" Tyrion hesitated, then shook his head. "No, you made a choice. The mistake was thinking the world would thank you for it." That night, Jon walked alone into the crypts beneath the Red Keep. What remained of them, anyway? The fire hadn't reached that far. The dead still rested in silence, untouched by dragonfire or betrayal. He found himself standing before the empty niche that had once held the bones of Rhaegar Targaryen. "My father," Jon said bitterly. "If that's even what you were, you gave me nothing. Not your name, not your voice, just your blood." The words echoed in the stone chamber. He thought of Daenerys again, of her trembling lips, the hope in her eyes even as he stabbed her. She had looked at him like a god, even in her final breath. He dropped to his knees, suddenly overwhelmed. The weight of the realm, of love lost, of choices, made it crashed over him like a wave. "I didn't want this," he whispered. "Any of it." He stayed there for a long time. The next morning, Jon held a royal court in the Great Hall. But this time, he stood not beside the iron throne, not seated on it, but on the stone floor before it. He addressed the gathered lords and bannermen with a voice stripped of ceremony. "Westeros is breaking," he said, "piece by piece. And if I must rule, I won't do it from behind a throne of melted swords. I'll walk the realm. I'll See its wounds for myself, the court murmured. Lord Royce from the Vale spoke first. You mean to abandon the capital? I mean to understand it, John said, and to remind the people I bleed like them. It was a risky move, bold, maybe foolish, but something shifted. Even the coldest eyes in the room blinked with surprise, and maybe a hint of respect. That evening, John rode out with a small guard, not as a king hiding behind banners, but as a man walking into a world that still wasn't sure if it wanted him alive. As he crossed the gates, a small child threw a stone at his horse. It missed, but the message didn't. They rode east, toward the Riverlands first. John insisted on avoiding royal processions or trumpeted arrival. No flags, no golden cloaks. Just a small company Sir Davos, a few trusted knights, and Ghost, always at his side like a white shadow. The idea was simple. If he was to rule these people, he had to walk among them, see what they suffered, hear what they whispered when. No one listened, but what he found wasn't anger. It was apathy. Villages that had once flown banners now flew none. Fields were untended, homes half burned. The war for the throne hadn't just destroyed cities, it had broken spirits. The common folk no longer cared who sat the Iron Throne. Targaryen, Stark, Baratheon, it was all the same to them. Kings came, and kings bled them dry. In Harrenhal, he met a boy no older than 10, sitting by the ruins with hollow eyes. When John offered him food, the child took it without a word, then said, "They said the Dragon Queen would fix everything." Then she burned it all down. John sat beside him. "And what do they say about me?" The boy didn't look at him. "That you killed her." That night, John didn't sleep. By the time they reached the outskirts of River Run, the rumors had already outrun them. That the king was coming, that he wore no crown, that he traveled like a beggar or a ghost. Sir Edmure Tully, once humiliated by Daenerys' counsel, and quietly restored under Jon's rule, greeted him with cautious respect. "You'll find no enemies here," Edmure said, "but you won't find loyalty either. They remember your queen, and they wonder if you'll be the next to light the match." Jon gave no speeches, no declarations. He listened to farmers whose sons had never returned from Daenerys' army, to widows who blamed both fire and ice for their grief, to small folk who had buried more children than harvests. But it was the faith that made the deepest cut. In a makeshift sept, rebuilt from stone and sorrow, Jon found a small congregation. The old septon preaching wore simple robes and spoke with fire in his voice. "She burned the wicked, yes," he said, "but she dreamed of mercy. She died a martyr killed by the one man who claimed to love her." Jon stayed in the shadows, hood pulled low. But the words pierced anyway. "And then," the septon said, "he rules now, the kingslayer of the soul. But no man who kills love can ever lead in truth." Jon left before the sermon ended. That night, Sir Davos confronted him beneath the torchlight outside their camp. "You can't keep punishing yourself like this." Jon didn't answer. "You've seen what the realm thinks. They don't need justice, they need healing. And if they won't love you, then at least let them fear you enough to follow. I didn't come to be feared. You came to rule." Jon looked up at the stars. "No, I came to remember why I did it, and maybe to find some piece of her that still lives in the people." Davos was quiet for a moment. "And what have you found?" Jon turned to him. "That they loved her more than they ever will. The May, even in death." A few days later, they reached Maiden Pool, where the remnants of a rebel faction flew a black dragon banner Daenerys sigil surrounded by red stars. They called themselves the Embers, fanatics, fighters, believers. Jon offered peace first. A letter, sealed and respectful, promising no retribution if they laid down their arms and disbanded. They returned his letter with arrows. Jon didn't give the order to attack. He rode to the gates himself, wearing no armor. The Ember's leader, a woman named Lysara, came out to meet him, red-robed, eyes glowing with something too close to zealotry. "You dare show your face here?" she hissed. "Kinslayer, queen killer, coward." "I did what I had to," Jon said. "No," she snapped. "You did what made you feel powerful. You killed the only light we had. And now you hide behind guilt and a throne of rot." Jon reached for Longclaw, but didn't draw it. "I'm not here to kill more," he said, "but I will if I must." Lysara spat at his feet. "You'll die 1,000 times in the stories." "We'll make sure of it." They never surrendered. The skirmish lasted 2 hours. When it was over, dozens lay dead on both sides. Jon stood over Lysara's body, her blood soaking into the frozen earth. She had died with a smile. Later that night, he told Davos, "I'm not sure if I'm ruling the realm or burying it piece by piece." Davos didn't answer. The wind howled through the trees. Ghost howled back. And somewhere in the shadows of Jon Snow's heart, the fire that once guided him flickered just a little dimmer. The snow deepened as Jon's company moved north again, not yet to Winterfell, but toward the Fingers, a rugged, wind-lashed land of stone and silence. The people there lived hard lives, closer to wolves than kings, and they welcomed Jon with suspicion, not loyalty. His name didn't carry honor anymore. It carried history, heavy, bloody history. The rebellion of the Embers had left more than corpses behind. Their symbols were now carved into doorposts, drawn in ash on barn walls, whispered into children's ears. The red stars encircling the dragon had become a sign of resistance, not against tyranny, against Jon himself. His very presence stirred rebellion. The worst came when they reached a village called High Tree. It was silent when they arrived. No bells, no children's laughter, no smoke from the chimneys, and no people. They found them in the church. 37 villagers, hung from the rafters. A message was scratched into the altar wood in blood. For the queen who would have burned. We burned first. Jon stood there a long time, the frozen breath of his men fogging the air, the stench of death choking what little soul the place had left. Davos whispered, "Fanatics did this. They want to make you a symbol of despair." Jon looked at the corpses, faces twisted in terror. He saw a mother holding her child in death. He saw a man with his hands clasped, as if still praying when the rope snapped his neck. He didn't speak. He walked out of the church and vomited in the snow. That night he gave no orders. He sat by the fire in silence, staring at the flames, like they held some answer. But they didn't. Only the memory of her voice returned. Daenerys, whispering about destiny, about mercy, about a better world that never came. Was this what mercy had become? A burning flag, a hung village, a crown of guilt he couldn't take off. He lay awake until morning, and then he did something no one expected. He turned his company south again. Sir Davos objected. "We've already been that way. We need to press north." Winterfell doesn't need me," Jon said. "The South does. They don't fear me enough. They don't know me enough." Davos frowned. "And what will you show them, Jon? The king who won't sit his throne? The man who begs the people for forgiveness they'll never give?" Jon mounted his horse. "No, I'll show them the truth. I'll show them what it costs." They arrived in Old Town 3 weeks later. The city was still recovering from war and plague. The Mesters kept to themselves. The faith was rebuilding. But in the alleyways and taverns, the Red Star banners had returned. Jon didn't hide this time. He walked the market square with his crown openly displayed, a simple iron band, cold and dark. People stopped and stared. Some spit, others bowed. But no one shouted, no one cheered. That silence again. That thick, choking silence. He held court that evening in the ruined Sept of the Seven, flanked by broken statues and melted candle wax. He spoke not from a throne, but standing on the cracked marble floor. "You hate me," he said to the crowd. "I understand." "Thee." Murmurs grew. "You say I stole your queen. You say I killed hope. Maybe I did." Louder now. Anger simmered. "But you didn't know her in the end. Not like I did. You didn't see what she had become. You didn't see the fire consume her eyes. You saw the dream. I saw the truth. I loved her, and I ended. Her." Gasps, shouts. One voice cried, "Murderer!" Another, "Long live the queen." John stepped forward. "If you want to hate me, do it. But don't lie to yourselves about what she would have done. You were never her future. You were only her throne." Silence again, deep, uneasy. He turned and left the sept. No guards. No army. But outside, someone threw a rock. It struck his shoulder. Another struck his jaw. Blood poured from his lip. He didn't flinch. He didn't order an arrest. He just walked on, bleeding under the stars of a broken city. That night, Davos entered his chambers. "They want you dead." John wiped blood from his mouth. "I know." "And still you won't raise your sword?" John looked at him. "What good is ruling the realm if I must kill it to keep it?" Davos sat down heavily, staring at the fire. "You've become a ghost, John. You don't speak like a king." "You?" "Speak like a man already buried." John stood up, walked to the window, and stared at the sea. "Maybe I am." Outside, waves crashed against the cliffs. And somewhere beyond the horizon, in the shadow of exile, a dragon still flew. The raven came at dawn. It bore no sigil, only a black ribbon wrapped around its leg, a silent symbol of urgency. John took the scroll and read the words without expression, though Davos watched his face closely for a flicker of anything. There was none. The raven had come from Winterfell. Bran was dying. They rode without pause, crossing the reach and the neck with haste. Ghost ran ahead like a pale spirit guiding them through the snow-laced wilderness. John barely spoke during the journey. His mind was a storm of faces, regrets, and the one truth that refused to go silent. He was running out of people who knew who he truly was. When they finally reached Winterfell, the gates opened slowly. The banners still bore the direwolf of House Stark, but John noticed they were faded now, worn by time, wind, and silence. Sansa met him at the courtyard steps. She had grown sterner since he last saw her. The lines on her face weren't from age, but from rule. Her voice was calm but distant. "You came quickly. You summoned me." "No," she said quietly. "He did. Bran was in the Godswood, of course. Where else would the last of the old blood wait to die?" John walked through the snow alone, stepping between the frozen roots of the great weirwood. Its red leaves danced gently in the wind, like dying embers. Bran sat beneath it in his wheeled chair, wrapped in furs, eyes closed. He opened them when John stepped closer. That eerie, calm gaze that always unsettled him. "You look tired," Bran said softly. John knelt beside him. "You're dying." Bran nodded once. "Everything dies." John didn't speak for a moment. "Then why did you call me?" Bran looked up at the red leaves, as if searching through their whispers. "Because you're about to break. And I needed to see if there was anything left. Of the boy I once knew." John's breath caught. "There's nothing left," he muttered. "Not of him, not of her, not of anything." Bran's voice was low but clear. You think wearing pain like a cloak makes you just. But you've stopped leading, Jon. You've started surviving. That's not the same. Jon looked away. I've ruled in her shadow, Bran. Every city I enter, they whisper her name. They paint her as a saint. I've bled to hold this kingdom together, and still they spit at me. Bran didn't blink. You thought they would love you for killing. Her? Jon stood abruptly. I didn't want them to love me. I wanted them to understand. Then show them, Bran said. Jon turned sharply. How? Bran's head tilted. With truth. With fire, if you must. Or with surrender. But you must choose. This limbo you've wrapped yourself in is killing. You faster than their hatred ever could. Jon's chest tightened. I'm no one's savior. Bran smiled faintly. No, you're just the man who was given the crown no one wanted, and that makes you the only kind worth having it. A wind passed through the godswood then, cold and strange. Bran's eyes fluttered. He was weakening. You must leave Winterfell. Soon, he said softly. But before you do, look upon your home. Let it remind you of who you are. Jon looked up at the weirwood. The red eyes stared back, unblinking, endless. He stayed with Bran until nightfall. By morning, Bran Stark, the last Greenseer, was dead. A funeral was quiet. Stark burials always were. No fanfare. Just fire, and snow, and silence. Sansa stood beside Jon as they watched the flames consume the body. He didn't want statues or songs, she said. Only remembrance. Jon nodded. He was never like the rest of us. No, she said. He was always somewhere else, seeing everything, and somehow, still so alone. After the flames burned low, Jon and Sansa walked together along the walls of Winterfell. You've changed, she said. So have you. She looked at him with a strange softness. I used to think you were the only one of us untouched. By this world. I was, Jon said bitterly. Until I touched fire. Sansa's gaze hardened. Do you regret it? Jon didn't answer. She stopped walking and turned to him. You don't belong to this throne, Jon. Not really. You belong to the North. To the people who still remember your name without flinching. You still have a home here. Jon shook his head. There's no home for me anymore. Not here. Not anywhere. Sansa didn't argue. She only reached out and gently touched his arm. Then make one. That night, Jon stood before the crypt of Ned Stark. He stared at the stone face carved in his father's likeness. Strong, honest, sad. I've made a mess of it all, Jon said. You warned me once honor would be the death of me. I thought you meant swords. I didn't know it would be this. He closed his eyes. I loved her. I still do. The stone did not answer. And still, he waited, as if the dead could forgive him when the living would not. Winterfell felt colder after Bran's death. Not because of snow or wind, but something deeper something inside Jon himself. A part of him had always drawn strength from his siblings, even after they had become strangers to one another. With Bran gone, that tether snapped. What remained was only duty. He stayed one more night in Winterfell, walking its walls, running his hand along stones older than memory. Ghost followed him in silence, their shadows stretching across the battlements. Under the moonlight, he passed the old training yard where he'd once sparred with Robb, Theon, and even Arya. So much had changed. They were all ghosts now, even the living ones. The next morning, Sansa met him at the stables. You're leaving again. He nodded. The longer I stay here, the more I forget the war's not over. Sansa looked tired but proud. You were always better in motion. Stillness never suited you. He tightened the saddle on his horse. Stillness lets you think. And thinking is dangerous for someone like you, she said with a half-smile. He chuckled lightly perhaps the first time in moons. But it didn't last. She handed him a sealed letter before he mounted. From Tyrion. It arrived this morning. He tucked it into his cloak without reading it. I'll read it on their road, then quieter. Take care of them. Of Winterfell. She touched his arm briefly. And you take care of yourself. You've bled enough for this realm. He didn't answer. On the third night of his return journey, Jon finally opened Tyrion's letter by firelight. It was short, unusually so. King of Ashes or Lord of Cinders, choose which you'll be before they choose for you. Something stirs in Essos. The Red Priests are not done, and neither is Drogon. Jon read it again, and again. Drogon. He hadn't spoken the dragon's name in months. He tried not to think about that final moment, the scream, the fury, the fire, the flight into the unknown. Drogon had disappeared with Daenerys' body, eastward beyond Valyria, where no sane man followed. But now Tyrion claimed something had stirred. Jon stared into the fire, lost in it. What if the dragon still flew not in mourning, but in purpose? What if the dream wasn't dead after all? By the time he returned to King's Landing, the city had changed. Walls were reinforced. Streets were watched. The whispers had quieted, but the eyes had not. Everywhere he walked, he felt them watching him, waiting. But this time, something had shifted. His journey had weathered him, hardened him. And when he entered the great hall for court, even the nobles sat straighter in their seats. He didn't speak for long. He laid Bran's death before them, and then a question. Who among you will carry this kingdom when I am gone? Murmurs rose, surprise, suspicion. Lord Tarley of Horn Hill spoke first. Do you mean to abdicate, your grace? Jon shook his head. Not yet, but we can't keep pretending peace is enough. The fire that scorched this realm still smolders in the Jarl. East, if we wait, it will reach our shores again. Lady Myrtens of Dorne narrowed her eyes. What fire, exactly? Jon drew Tyrion's letter and tossed it onto the table. Red priests rising. Targaryen banners flown in the shadow of Meereen. And something worse, Drogon, has been seen again. The silence was instant. The council froze. Where? Davos asked grimly. Jon looked up. Volantis. That night, he met Tyrion in the garden behind the Red Keep. The imp wore robes instead of armor now. A man done with battles, but not with war. You knew this would reach me, Jon said. Tyrion sipped his wine. I hoped. Oh, you've been brooding so long. I thought perhaps you'd finally turn to stone. Jon ignored the jab. Is it true? Yes, he flies at night. A shadow against the stars. They call him the flame of the Queen returned. Jon closed his eyes. And the people believe? Oh, they believe. And belief is more dangerous than dragons, Jon. They say she will rise again. At death cannot hold the mother of fire. She's gone. Tyrion raised an eyebrow. Is she? In a world of magic and prophecy, are you willing to bet your crown on that? Jon stood still for a moment. Then, I'll go. Tyrion blinked. To Volantis? To Essos? You're mad. Maybe. But if that dragon flies in her name, the world will follow it. And we can't afford another war born of ashes and devotion. Tyrion studied him, a long silence passing between them. Then he smiled sadly. And so the bastard rides. East, chasing ghosts and gods. Jon didn't smile. No, he rides east to finish what should have ended in the throne room. He turned and walked away. The night air felt heavier than before. And somewhere far across the narrow sea, wings beat against the stars. The ship bound for Essos cut through the narrow sea under moonless skies. No banners flew from its mast, no royal guards in polished armor. Only a handful of men accompanied Jon Snow, those who chose to follow not a king, but a man on a doomed journey. Sir Davos, of course. Ghost, loyal to the last breath. And a few northern warriors who had nothing left to lose. Jon spent most of the voyage alone on the deck, staring at the waves. He hadn't told Sansa he was going. He hadn't even left instructions for Rule. Perhaps he meant to return, or perhaps he didn't. All he knew was this: if Drogon still lived, and if the whispers of Daenerys rising again were true, then peace was nothing but a dream, and his guilt was not yet buried. They landed south of Volantis, where the great red temples rose from the earth like fire-hardened bones. The city was alive with chants, drums, and torches. Banners with Daenerys' sigil waved proudly from the rooftops, three-headed dragon in red, encircled by a golden flame. The people called her Athor Ahai returned. The priests called her the Flame Walker. And Drogon? He had been seen soaring above the black cliffs 3 nights prior. They moved quietly through the city. Jon wore a hood, but even that couldn't disguise the north in his face. The people whispered as he passed. Some stared in awe. Others backed away in fear. Davos hissed, "They recognize you." Jon nodded. Let them. The Red Temple was grander than anything in Westeros' pillars of obsidian and bloodstone, halls that reeked of incense and old magic. Inside, the air burned. They were brought before the High Flamekeeper, a woman called Vaelora. Her robes were crimson and gold, and her eyes were too familiar. She smiled when she saw Jon. So, the Kingslayer of Fire has come at last. I came for the truth, Jon said. Truth? She echoed. Truth is not what the people want. They want hope. They want to believe she will return, and through him, she already has. She led them to a high balcony. The wind there stung the skin, hot and thick with smoke. Then a sound came distant, but unmistakable. A roar, Drogon. Jon stepped too. The edge. In the distance, against the red-streaked sky, wings stretched wide, black and burning at the edges, like a storm come alive. Drogon soared high above the sea cliffs, circling slowly as if searching. Jon whispered, "He's alive." "Yes," Vaelora said softly, "and he remembers." Jon turned sharply. "What do you mean?" She smiled, too calmly. He carried her into the fire. But fire does not kill its children. Not all of them. Jon's blood ran cold. "No," he said. "That's not possible." But her face said otherwise. She breathed still, King of Ashes, not as you remember her, but as prophecy demands. Jon backed away, heart racing. "You lie." "I believe," she said, "and belief has already built armies." That night, Jon climbed alone to the cliffs. Drogon had returned to roost in the valley below, near a broken temple of the old Valyrian gods. He did not attack. He did not flee. He watched Jon with burning golden eyes that held a glimmer of memory. Eyes that had once wept over a dying queen. Jon stepped forward slowly. "I'm sorry," he said. Drogon let out a low, thunderous growl. Smoke puffed from his nostrils, but he didn't move. Jon fell to his knees. "I didn't want to kill her." Silence. Only the crackle of distant fires. "I loved her. I loved her more than anyone ever should have. But she was becoming something terrible. I thought I could stop it before it consumed everything." His voice cracked. "I killed the only person who ever believed I was more than just a bastard, and now I rule over a graveyard of guilt." He looked up. "But if she's alive, truly alive, then let me see her." The wind shifted. Drogon's eyes narrowed. Then he turned and flew into the sky. By dawn, the truth had reached him. A caravan of red priests approached the temple. They bore a large cart covered in black velvet, carried like a coffin. But inside was not death. Inside was her, Daenerys. She was breathing shallow, unconscious, but alive. Burned along her neck and chest, her silver hair mostly gone. But her face still hers. Jon stood frozen. Elora whispered, "She sleeps now? The fire preserved her. We found her body cold, but her blood, it moved, barely. We fed her fire, magic, faith." Jon stepped forward, unable to breathe. "Why?" he rasped. "Why bring her back?" Elora turned to him. "Because the world is not finished with her, and neither are you." He reached out, hands trembling, and touched Daenerys' face. Warm, alive, her eyes fluttered. Slowly, she looked at him and whispered, "You." Jon collapsed to his knees. He wept, not because she lived, but because he knew now the story wasn't over. Not for her, not for him, not for the throne, of ashes still burning inside them both.